So last week I made a video exposing Joe Biden's sexual harassment that he often did live on camera when he was doing swearing in ceremonies and things like that as vice president, and I was sort of just giving my opinion how I think, how bad it is and how I think it is, sexual harassment and everything, abusing his power as president to make people feel uncomfortable, and really you got to question why. And even if his intentions are innocent, as far as that goes, it's still super inappropriate and obviously does border on sexual harassment. But since then, a number of allegations have came out against Biden, with people saying that he kissed them and made them feel uncomfortable or touched their inner thigh and everything. And what has been amazing to me on Twitter is the defense of Joe Biden by feminists, in particular, I guess, democratic feminists from the Democrat Party. It is actually insane to me that, they're not holding up people like Joe Biden and, as a historical point, Bill Clinton to a similar standard. And I want to get into some tweets and some people who have defended Joe Biden. But to start with, there's one interaction I want to get into on Twitter today. So I was fighting some of these so-called feminists. Why didn't they believe people who were coming out against Joe Biden, even though there was video evidence where they're not taking this seriously and everything? And most people were saying, well, he's not as bad as Trump, or, is it really sexual harassment or anything? So I was fighting with one particular lady called Diane, and here's just a funny scenario which I made a tweet about. So I said, so Diane is shilling for Biden, saying it's all politically motivated. I asked her if she'd applied the same logic to the Kavanaugh allegations. She said she didn't believe the Kavanaugh stuff, to try and make the point that she doesn't always believe women who come forward with allegations. But whoops, it seems Diane forgot nothing stays deleted on the internet, so I find her old tweets where she hashtags I stand with Dr. Ford. So the tweet that she said to me, I'll just read it out. She said, I don't believe those who came out against Kavanaugh because there was the question of his judicial record and his not being qualified for the job. Then there's, of course, Merrick Garland. Blasey Ford was a ruse to me, Hill another story. And then she has a tweet back in September. Would look good on both Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. Kavanaugh withdraw now. Stop Kavanaugh now. And I stand with Dr. Ford. So I tweet in conclusion, most dem and fake feminists defending Biden only care about Me Too when it benefits them politically. Think Diane is a nice case study of this. So I would describe myself as a feminist. With my socialist leanings, I believe everyone should be equal and have the same opportunities as each other and shouldn't face discrimination. And you'd think that's what most feminists would think, but I think it's pretty clear this whole Biden thing, and in the past Bill Clinton, exposes the hypocrisy of Democrats. So I really have my own problems with the Western feminist movement, and in particular there's things like their lack of criticism on religion, whether that's Christianity in America and the role it's played in women's subjugation, not only in America but across Europe, or, criticism of Islamic countries and the way Islamic countries often treat women, and the way, these societies often view women because of their religion. And I get a bit annoyed that there's not enough criticism of that, and there's even quite a bit of defense against it. For example, we live in a nice society where you can wear what you want, so fair enough, you can wear a hijab. Look, I can go out wearing this on my head because it's, it's a head covering as well, and that's all fine. But, I wouldn't really want to live in a country where I have to wear a head covering because of religious law. And that's something, for example, in Iran, you have to wear the hijab, and that's why you get Iranian feminists often burning their hijabs and stuff because they have to wear them. And I find it quite hypocritical while, you can defend the right for people in the West to wear what they want, at the same time they sort of glorify this image, and it's something I don't really particularly agree with. And I find a bit frustrating that, feminists don't criticise the things that have oppressed women for the last, couple thousand years. But in terms of, these recent allegations, for example, Trump had multiple people come out and say, he sexually assaulted me, he sexually harassed me, he walked in on me when I was changing. His ex-wife, Ivana Trump, said that Trump raped him, but she signed a non-disclosure thing. You also have Brett Kavanaugh, who was accused of sexual harassment and gang rape and everything. And you had Anita Hill, who obviously accused Clarence Thomas of all this sexual misconduct, sending her these things about bestiality and everything. And Democrats always believe when allegations come forward against these people, and so do I for the most part, especially people who have a history of it, and especially Brett Kavanaugh. You saw his conduct when he was, questioning all these things. It's so obvious he is guilty, and it's just such a dodgy conspiracy around him. And obviously Donald Trump, it's honestly not surprising in the least, and the fact there's over 20 women all saying this sort of thing, and the way he talks about women and everything, it's honestly not surprising, and I understand why people definitely believe that. But of course, people came out when Donald Trump was running for president and Brett Kavanaugh was going to become a Supreme Court justice. So, according to these people, the Joe Biden stuff is politically motivated. Would you not also apply the same logic to this? And I think it's totally okay for it to be politically motivated and come forward like these people did, like Anita Hill and Dr. Ford and everything, because you don't want the person who treated you so badly and harassed you to become one of the most powerful people in the country, whether that's on the Supreme Court or becoming the president. So people coming out now about Joe Biden, and obviously it stems from, you know, the first allegations and recent videos going around Twitter and everything, and of course, yeah, I made a YouTube video before it all blew up as well, so, you know, people were talking about it before. It's because they don't want Joe Biden to become president, and, you know, I don't understand what's wrong with people coming forward now. They're like, I don't want someone who groped me and can't treat women properly to become the most powerful man on earth. And that's why people came out against Donald Trump before he was elected president. But again, Democrats and Western feminists don't care about that, and like, you know, that nice little case study I showed you on Twitter, you will write something about standing with Dr. Ford with the Kavanaugh stuff, but when it's Joe Biden, you're bending over backwards to defend his conduct, which is totally inappropriate. And people saying this is a smear campaign orchestrated by Bernie Sanders are even crazier. Do you think Bernie Sanders, you know, this champion for equality his whole life, someone who wouldn't even criticize Hillary Clinton, who was one of the worst, you know, Democratic candidates in history, he even campaigned for her, you know, someone who goes against all his values, he could have been so harsh in the debates, but he wasn't. Do you think he'd then orchestrate this smear campaign against Joe Biden? And I also want to underline my point by showing some of the people who've come out to defend him, just to show how disappointing this whole situation is. So first we got Nancy Pelosi, who says, accusations against Biden should not at all disqualify him from a 2020 run. Isn't that nice? You know, one of the most powerful women in the country saying that someone's sexual misconduct should not disqualify them from running for president. So some lady called Sharon Hole tweeted, so it's okay for Bernie Sanders to put his hands on your shoulders, but just not Joe Biden, Lucy Flores. And Lucy is the person who came forward saying, you know, Joe Biden kissed her and made her uncomfortable. And who liked this tweet? It was Mark Hamill, who plays Luke Skywalker and the Joker in the Batman animated series. So that's nice and depressing. That's someone I really like. Is so brainwashed by, you know, mainstream democratic feminism that he thinks that's a legit argument. You know, Bernie Sanders putting his hand on someone's shoulder in a totally non-threatening and consensual way is equivalent to some creepy old man sniffing a teenage girl's hair, kissing her neck and saying that he'll see her when he gets home. That's totally the same thing, isn't it, Mark Hamill? It's totally stupid. So Dianne Feinstein also says, Biden is a warm, tactile person, in her defense of him being accused of all these things. Another lady called Randy Mayhem Singer, I don't think she's anyone particularly relevant, she said, the spreading of the story feels very Russia-inspired to me, and the worst thing is that it delegitimizes women who've suffered real and harmful incidences of sexual abuse. So there you go, that's the core of it, really. You know, people like me who were spreading the story before, we're paid by Russia to spread the vision. Not that there's about, you know, 10 other Democratic candidates who can become the nominee. It's, you know, this is one person these allegations are coming out against. You know, I'm paid by Russia, and everything Joe Biden does was actually totally fine, and us getting annoyed about it delegitimizes actual experiences of sexual abuse. Not that if I did that in the workplace, I would get fired straight away, or if someone's boss came in and started sniffing their hair while putting their arms on their shoulders and kissing them and whispering stuff in their ear. Do you think that is acceptable in any context, in any workplace across, you know, the Western world? Do you think anyone is not getting fired for doing that in this current climate? You know 100% anyone is getting fired for that. So Joe Biden shouldn't be pondering about running for president because he's done all this shit. It should be like, no, this disqualifies you automatically. And don't kid yourself for a second that if Bernie Sanders was videoed doing this multiple times across about a decade, he would get let off the hook by all these people. They would not defend him for a second, and you know that for a fact. The hypocrisy is so staggering, and like I proved in that tweet before, they of course defend Biden, but you know, they weren't defending Kavanaugh because they don't apply the same logic. Me Too is only a political tool for a lot of the Western feminist movement. When Donald Trump and Kavanaugh are accused of stuff, you know, let's all jump on the bandwagon, we'll never let them forget it. And I believe, you know, they did do stuff as well. But when Joe Biden does stuff, or when Bill Clinton is accused of rape by multiple women, you know, and obviously that whole thing with Monica Lewinsky, I think that's sexual abuse. You know, the president is preying on some young intern at the White House, and you think that's not sexual abuse? The most powerful man in the world. And I think all this stuff just really shows the hypocrisy of all the Democrats, you know, electing people like this, supporting people like this. Because Joe Biden's a funny meme with Obama, we've got to like him and everything. It's totally crazy. So just to touch on one last argument, they're saying, if it's Trump versus Biden, I'm obviously going to vote for Biden because his history of sexual harassment isn't as bad as Trump. Now that is such a ridiculous argument. It should be that Joe Biden should be disqualified from running now. Let's choose one of the other many candidates who are running. You know, the Democratic field is so crowded this season. Why does it have to be Joe Biden, who hasn't even announced he's running yet? And this is all before we go into his political record of being racist, of, you know, being sexist, voting for stuff like the Patriot Act, the Iraq War and everything like that. Why is it worth dying on this hill defending this obviously awful politician? What, because, you know, he was Obama's vice president? So we must bow down to him because he's part of the Democratic establishment. You know for a fact Dianne Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi and all these other people would definitely criticize and tell Bernie to drop out if he did the exact same thing, and that is just 100% fact. So I will leave you with one final quote from one, you know, rubbish Western feminist who obviously isn't a real feminist. So Alyssa Milano stands behind Joe Biden saying, "I am proud to call Joe Biden a friend. He has been a leader and a champion on fighting violence against women for many years, and I have been fortunate to accompany him to events with survivors where he has listened to their stories, empathized with them and comforted them." So because Joe Biden never did anything weird to you, you're just, you know, totally throwing out any other woman's experience of sexual harassment by him. And I think someone like her just sums up Western feminism, because as much as it's a force for positive change in many ways, you can't be selective about it because it makes you uncomfortable politically. You know, if a Democrat does sexual abuse, you got to call them out on it. And some people do, like Al Franken had to resign, but people like Joe Biden don't. And that just shows because Joe Biden is entrenched in the Democratic Party establishment, like Nancy Pelosi, like Bill Clinton and stuff. No one's going to really call them out. And it is pretty disgusting to see her defending this. And people might say, you're a man, you don't understand, you can't talk to women like this about feminism. And here's the point, really. I have a girlfriend, I have a mum, I have a sister and everything. If Joe Biden did that to any of them, do you not think I would feel sick and be so angry about that? So why is anyone defending this? You know, if you're a real feminist, why are you letting him off the hook? You know, if Donald Trump did that to a 15-year-old girl, to a 5-year-old girl, you know, all these young girls on video, if you know if Donald Trump did that, you'd be so pissed off and you'd be calling for his impeachment, and rightly so. So why don't you hold Joe Biden to the same extent, and why don't you hold people like Bill Clinton to the same, you know, rules you make all these other people follow? And that shows the hypocrisy of Western feminism in general, how they get so scared about being seen as impolite and everything. And that goes to my point about, you know, not criticising either Christianity in America or Islam throughout the world. And that's just something that really pisses me off. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about Joe Biden and this whole controversy. If you like this style of content, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to my channel. If you want to follow me on social media, follow me at the Kavanaugh on both Twitter and Instagram. Also, check out my WordPress where I write some articles. That is the Kavanaugh WordPress. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.